Organizers for this. So my name is Eric Sokol. I'm from the National Ecological Observatory Network in the US, and I'm a staff scientist there. We have Chandra Earl from the Biorepository with NEON, sitting in the front there from the US. Kate Ingenloff from GBIF is a co-organizer. And then Greg Maurer and Marty Downs are from the US from the Environmental Data Initiative and the Long-Term Ecological Research Network, respectively. And so they also co-organized this session, but they couldn't make it to the meeting. And so the format for this session is a series of lightning talks. And then we were going to have a panel discussion after the lightning talks. And it'll be more of a panel discussion / discussion with you all, since so many of our speakers had to participate virtually. So it's difficult to get them to discuss over Zoom in the room with us. So we'll see how we can manage that. Oh, clicker. Oh, I uploaded it to the thing. No, I uploaded like weeks ago. Okay. All right, looks like I'll wing it. My PowerPoint's missing for the intro. But basically, I just wanted to go over the motivation behind this session that we were putting together. So as I mentioned, my co-organizers for this session are from the United States Long-Term Ecological Research Program and from the Environmental Data Initiative. So they're managers of long-term data. And we've had an ongoing collaboration since the beginning of NEON. Since I started at NEON, but before we were in full operations, trying to think about what are the things we need to do to make our biodiversity data interoperable to facilitate synthesis. So NEON's an observatory for the US. It's the Ecological Observatory. We have 81 sites across the United States. The objective is to monitor biodiversity for 30 years. And we've been in full operation since 2019, so we're about 6 years into operations. So it's open, free data to anybody. Our mission aligns pretty well with the US Long-Term Ecological Research Program. They've been around for much longer though. So some of the sites are up to 40 years old. Some of the data go back much farther than that. They have some data sets that are 100 years, but they're very site specific. And so there's this history of us collaborating and thinking about what can we do to facilitate synthesis. More recently, we've started working with folks from the Imagomics Institute at Ohio State University and some other universities, and also bringing in folks from, for example, GBIF, to think about not only collaborating between NEON and the LTER to facilitate synthesis, but how do we go beyond that and start thinking about, how do data providers need to be talking to the folks that are developing new technologies, for example, using different AI tools to facilitate ecological synthesis. And so the objective of this session is to get folks together who have the perspective of data providers, data users, trying to conduct synthesis, and folks developing tools in this sort of brave new world of AI and ML technology and very rapidly increasing in availability of data. The talks today aren't necessarily about AI, but if you're at the abstract, that's part of the motivation, just thinking about these new technologies and how they influence synthesis. And so we'll have a series of lightning talks where folks will talk about sort of how they're leveraging these technologies in ecological synthesis. Okay, so our first 3 talks are recorded. Our first is the road to interdisciplinarity, finding, oh, hey, look at that. There's my PowerPoint. All right, I want to hit a couple of things on the PowerPoint real quick before moving on to the talks then. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right, so just, hitting on the point that ecological synthesis is becoming much more, well, it's always been multimodal, but the amount of data is rapidly increasing. the types of data that are coming in are more varied in scale, frequency, all these things. And so dealing with these different data types is a challenge. At NEON, even within our observatory, we have over 180 different data products representing many different types of data. And even just running queries to answer an ecological question across all these different data products is challenging. And so there's an opportunity to think about how do different AI applications map onto the ecological questions and challenges that we have. So this paper from Pollock et al., so a lot of folks from Imageomics were involved in this, did a really nice job of mapping different AI applications into ecological challenges and kind of provided a framework for a group of us that wanted to think about, all right, what do we need to do to start maybe not building but designing or thinking about the design and the requirements of an infrastructure for using AI tools with biodiversity. And so we got together a group of folks. We had an initial workshop back in August. And it includes folks that are liaisons to the user community, data providers, cyber infrastructure providers, data users, ML and data infrastructure developers. So, very intentionally, we're trying to get this intersection between computer scientists, data providers, and the ecologists that are doing synthesis. Oops. And so the vision is something like this, where we're not prescribing data models and APIs to the different networks, but we want to be able to understand what the different APIs look like, what the different data models look like, and are there ways that we can help facilitate building AI tools to help synthesis that can understand how to search and query and get data from all these different sources. In our discussion centered around this idea of this continuum of data readiness for AI applications. So, there's everyone in this room, I'm sure, is familiar with fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. But then what's the next step to get to fair for AI? And fair for AI being data that are fair enough for AI to be used in making data fully AI ready. Essentially, getting to the point where you can automate the process. So at NEON, our data are fair. Are they fair for AI? There's probably more work we need to do to get them there. And we don't know what the AI applications are that people are going to be implementing. And it's not necessarily our job to make data AI ready for every application, but we want to know how to get to that intermediate point. So in our workshop, we got folks together from data sources. We have developers together thinking about different use cases. What we really wanted to do was start to inventory what the different data sources are, what the different data use cases are. And this is maybe we can, in a discussion at the end of the lightning talks, start to think about that. Because we're still in that process of creating these inventories. Let's see, here we go. And so that brings us to the lightning talks for today. So we want to hear different perspectives from biodiversity data providers, data aggregators, data users, and we want to focus on opportunities, challenges, and how can we leverage partnerships. And again, we're rethinking ecological synthesis within emergent technologies, not necessarily AI and ML. That's just kind of the use case that I have that got our group to think about this topic for a session. Okay, so the first talk, again, is the road to interoperability, finding common ground among biological data providers, and this is a recorded presentation by Kelsey Heelsman. And yeah, so I'll let them fire up the presentation.
Hi all, I'm Kelsey Heelsman, and this is the road to interoperability, finding common ground among biological data providers, some work that I've been doing for the past year or so with Steve Fromell, Sean Serban, and Kit Luers. So we know that we want to be able to monitor biodiversity and estimate it both locally, nationally, and globally. And we have monitoring efforts in the US, including NEON, the Forest Service, the LTER network, and we also have global data available in GBIF. And all of these data are findable, accessible, but not interoperable. And so that's what I'll be talking about today. We care about interoperability One, because it allows us to facilitate the synthesis of biodiversity data. I got that phrase straight from the session description. We can complement data sets when they're interoperable. So shown here is a map of observations collected by NEON and observations from GBIF at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, which is on the Chesapeake Bay, just nearby Washington, D.C. When data are interoperable, we can also compare data sets. So in this case, I'm comparing NEON and GBIF and the spatial and taxonomic completeness of both data sets. We can also fill in gaps in the landscape when we have interoperable data. We can also answer big ecological questions when we have so much abundantly available data, not just NEON's data, but maybe including all of those data sources to answer questions about biological invasions, to classify what species are in a location using remote sensing imagery, and to add in other machine learning approaches. So although these were all in the context of NEON, we can also expand that to include other data sources. So we have all of these abundant, freely available on-the-ground data. I mentioned before we have these thoroughly sampled data sets from biological data providers here in the US, and then we have GBIF data, which are collected when they're collected by whoever collects them. A lot of them are from iNaturalist, but that doesn't mean that they are not valuable data. They're actually incredibly valuable. And when we can combine them with other data, there are actually bi-directional benefits. So we can use the more thoroughly sampled data sets to assess the quality of the GBIF data, and we can use GBIF data to fill in the gaps of unsampled areas, seeing what might be there. So I argue that the best route to interoperability is to use the Darwin Core Data Standard, which is what GBIF uses, and apply it to NEON's vegetation survey data. And it's not too hard when you think about the way that Darwin Core is structured. There's kind of like these main concepts: the event, which is the when and the where and the why the data were collected, and the occurrence, which is the who and the what was seen. And with the new data package, we can include even more context for the who, what, where, when, and why. So with the Darwin Core Data Standard, we gain context for the motives and therefore an understanding of how complete the data are. And we can use that to quantitatively determine the uncertainty. We can also get spatial details that allow us to think about the data, as a map spatially. And we can compare the things like species presence or biodiversity metrics to imagery, again, to do things like filling gaps. So we want these biodiversity maps. We can quantitatively determine the uncertainty, and we can compare species presences to aerial imagery. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a poster this evening, where I argue to use all of this abundantly available data to monitor biodiversity. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who funded this research. And if I have time, I'll take questions. Thanks so much.
All right, we'll save questions for the discussion. And the next talk, again, is a video presentation, Harmonizing Systematic Survey Observations, Applications of the Term Ontology in Ecology. This is by Siddheswara Guru.
Hello, I'm Suresh Vagre. I'm program lead of the Turn Data Services Analytical Platform. Today I will provide an overview of Turn ontology that is used to harmonize systematic survey in ecology. First, some context. So site-based systematic survey is a widely used method to gather critical data about species, habitat, and ecosystem. Multiple protocols are used to measure different features of the site. In ecological site survey, data collection happens as part of a site visit. Survey measures several real-world features of a site. However, survey methods varies from project to project. Therefore, terminologies and methods used will also be different. Overall data collected are stored in database, and this is one of the sample database from institutional repository. And this is one more schema of an institutional repository that stores a systematic survey. You can see schema varies and there is a need for data harmonization to bring data from multiple surveys. Therefore, there is a need for a common data model to represent systematic survey data. We will provide a high-level overview of a common information model to conceptually represent systematic survey data. The information model is based on semantic sensor network ontology and reuses several other ontologies. The model represents systematic survey as an activity that happens during a site visit, and an activity can be a sampling, observation, and then intervention. Furthermore, each of the activity is acting on a feature of interest, which is a real-world entity. For example, if we take an observation activity, if an observer is making an observation of each of the plant species in a site, then the feature of interest is an individual plant with a feature type plant individual. The observation uses a procedure, measures observable properties such as plant height. Similarly, sampling activity will be performed by a sampler and a feature of interest, which will result in a sample. If you look at how the survey data is collected, observer identify a site and visit them. Identify certain feature types in a site whose properties needs to be measured. And finally, observes and measure all observed properties of the related feature type. Each of the feature type is a control vocabulary, and so are observed properties and procedures. Some of the feature type control vocabularies are identified from multiple domains as well. The model uses core classes, and most of the variables are managed as control vocabularies. So just to give an example, this is an example from the turn surveillance monitoring, which measures the soil characteristics at different soil profile. In this example, when observation is made on soil profile, feature of interest, measuring observable properties, soil color, soil horizon, and pH. All attributes of soil profiles are captured as attributes of feature of interest. Here, feature types, attributes, observable properties, and procedures are represented as control vocabularies. To conclude, we have built an information model for systematic survey. It is an extension of SOSA ontology. The standard assumes that the control vocabulary represents observable property, procedures, unit of measurement, and feature type. We have built EcoPlots, a data integration platform based on the proposed model. So the EcoPlot integrates data from multiple sources, and users can access data across different multiple sources and download the data as one single package. You can get more details about the information model in the above link, and then you can play with the EcoPlots as well. The third link provides the linked data viewer for all the linked data published by Turn. Thank you for your attention. Happy to take any questions.
Let's see. All right. Our next presenter is Sanjeev Menon. The talk is titled Mapping Your Neighborhood Avifauna, Empowering Biodiversity Conservation Through Citizen Science in India.
Good day, everyone. I am Praveen J from State of India's Birds Partnership, talking to you about a tool called MINA, Mapping Your Neighborhood Avifauna. Birdwatchers watch birds. Sometimes they make notes of this kind. Most importantly, they record three things. They record what they saw, where they saw, and when they saw. If that all set of information is put into a single database, in this case eBird, with several portals, country portals, and they are analyzed, what happens? That's a question which we started with. Can we use this passive database to do something meaningful? Can we find out how the birds are doing across years in terms of populations? Which resulted in two reports in 2020 and 2023 called State of India's Birds, and a tool called MINA, which I would like to introduce you. I am playing this video.
This is Myna, a bird we can see all across India. What if we told you that Myna is also a powerful tool for exploring India's rich bird life? A tool that can help with vital information to conserve the habitats of birds around us. Myna, Mapping Your Neighborhood Avifauna, is a free online tool accessible to everyone. You could be a student working on a school project on the birds of your city, or you could be an enthusiast, curious about how bird-rich your local park or college campus is. You're an official gathering information for a proposal to conserve a lake nearby. Or perhaps you're a consultant who needs information for an environmental impact assessment of a forest, a grassland, or a wetland. Head over to the State of India's Birds website and click on the MINA tab. The first step is to give your report a name. Next, tell MINA what location you're interested in by specifying the area for which you want to generate a bird report. You can upload a map file in any of several formats. Or simply select the polygon tool and draw the boundaries of the area you are interested in. Finally, if you want to report for an entire district, you can specify that too. You can also choose from a list of predefined localities. These are popular, often well-birded places called hotspots, taken from the eBird platform. You can also filter by date in case you need data from recent years alone. Once you have selected your area and the timeline, your report is just one click away. To generate the report, MINA draws from millions of observations in the underlying eBird database. Contributed by thousands of birdwatchers from around the country and carefully curated by scientists at the State of India's Birds Partnership. The report is a neat visual summary of the bird species occurring in the area. It highlights species of conservation concern and gives information on which species are endemic to your region. While summarizing key points, the report also provides a detailed list so that all information is available as needed. And it can be easily downloaded with just one click. NGOs, citizen groups, government departments and agencies conducting environmental impact assessments are using MINA to complement their on-ground service. LTER Lake is a critical nesting site for many birds. A report generated by MINA helped protect more than 2,000 trees from being cut in this bird hotspot. Similarly, authorities used information generated by MINA to save nesting trees in Damal Lake. The MINA tool is designed for you to easily access information on birds. It is a simple yet powerful application built on the foundation of robust data contributed by citizen science. Become a MINA user today.
So as you see, the use cases which MINA caters to is quite wide across different classes. But the fundamental thing is that this is the MINA flywheel. So birdwatchers, the community of birdwatchers is contributing information to eBird, which is analyzed by State of India's Birds to create tools like MINA, which feeds back into the society for conservation action. On behalf of the entire State of India's Birds Partnership, thank you very much.
All right, our next talk is in person. So our next presentation will be Ship to Shelf, Scripps Oceanography's Pelagic Invertebrate Collection supporting sample collection, marine biodiversity data production, and storage for global users. And our speaker will be Lindsay Sala.
All right, well, thank you to everyone for being here. Good afternoon. I want to dive right in, and I think I'm going to kind of take a zoomed out approach and give you a bit of a whirlwind tour of our collection, a little bit about our sample holdings, the associated data, the data we produce, the different programs that we work with, so that you can kind of see what type of offerings that we have through our collection, and we can kind of think about how to make some of these data potentially interoperable. Okay, so our collection has gained its reputation for archiving unsorted. Closer? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so our collection has gained its reputation for archiving unsorted mixed community plankton net tow lots and their associated data, and in particular, time series sample sets. So this has resulted in approximately 150,000 of these unsorted mixed community samples that we typically apply to different biological and ecological research. And you can see the geographic coverage right here behind me. And in addition, we house voucher specimens of planktonic and pelagic invertebrates. About 35,000 of those were part of a recent digitization effort. We're mobilizing those, have about 80% online through GBIF at the moment. So within our mixed community samples, we are home to two notable marine ecosystem assessment programs that house their invertebrate plankton materials within our collection. First is the CalCoffee, or the California Cooperative Oceanic Fisheries Investigation. And this program is a collaborative program between Scripps Oceanography, NOAA National Marine Fisheries, Cal Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it was initiated to monitor California's sardine fishery. By collecting the fish eggs and larvae and net tows and associated hydrographic data. This program is celebrating its 76 years of consistent measurements, and it is the longest running integrated oceanographic time series in the US EEZ. So due to this rich observational data set from CalCoffee and noted changes in the California current ecosystem on a variety of timescales, the CCE LTER site was conceptualized and initiated in 2004. They have the goal to understand and communicate long-term, or the effects of long-term climate variability and climate change on the pelagic ecosystem within the California current ecosystem. So what this figure shows is the impressive volume of samples that both these programs have resulted in. We have about 87,000 samples from the two, and on the upper panel I have the map of the the west coast of North America. Lower panel is a zoomed in look at the Southern California Bight. Looking at those two, oh, thank you. Oh dear. Okay, sorry about that. So yes, here we are looking at the west coast of North America, the zoomed in Southern California Bight, with each of these colored triangles representing different net types that target different organisms based on mesh size, depth, and recovery styles. So in the early decades of CalCoffee, Scripps was charged with the responsibility to determine the biological factors that impact the sardine. And one thing that we have continued to focus on for 7.5 decades are estimates of different members of the zooplankton community, how those fluctuate in space and time, with the CCE LTER program building off of CalCoffee to interpret the processes that cause change. So the highlighted net type samples are what we use to enumerate zooplankton communities to species level via microscopy, which is something that I work on, and utilizing a type of flatbed scanner called a zooscan that we can identify and measure higher level taxa in order to evaluate trends and changes in zooplankton abundances and biomass. So these two programs, their data, continued data production, are supported by the CCE LTER program. They can be found internally at our collections database page at the Cooperative Zooplankton Data Space. But additionally, the UFAUCIDER krill time series and the ZooScan time series can also be found at the Environmental Data Initiative, Data Initiative portal. Okay, brief look at our voucher specimen collection. In 2020, we were lucky to join a consortium of 18 institutions across the United States to mobilize our voucher specimen collection through a thematic collection network. And these are some of the highlights of that work. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how these specimen data might be used into the future. This is the first time we are actually bringing this set of dark materials out into the light. And hope to see them, more diversely used, and also thinking about how we can better collect and relationally add different data types, especially as a lot of projects that we're working on move into, oh my gosh, the molecular realm. So here's a look at our voucher collection by percentage in taxa in the pie chart and the number of lots in the legend there. We've had some deep expertise in the calanoid copepods. As you can see, it's pretty evident with the volume there, euphausids, and a number of decapod taxa as it relates to fisheries research. So with that, thank you very much, and look forward to chatting more.
All right, our next presentation, our next two actually are videos again. So our next one is by Kelsey Ewell from the Neon Biorepository, translating ecological data to advance biodiversity data synthesis and partnerships through the U.S. National Ecological Observatory Biorepository.
Hello, my name is Kelsey Ewell. I'm the data science specialist for the National Ecological Observatory Network Biorepository at Arizona State University, and I'm going to be talking today about how we work to translate ecological data to advance biodiversity synthesis and partnerships. The United States National Ecological Observatory Network is a continental scale program designed to monitor and forecast ecological change through 30 years of standardized data collection across 81 terrestrial and aquatic field sites, producing more than 180 freely available data products. To do this, NEON relies on a complex infrastructure to allow the flow of data and samples across its network and make it available to the people doing research into large-scale ecological questions. One aspect is the collection of physical samples and specimens across all field sites, which leads to the focus of my talk, the NEON Biorepository, based out of Arizona State University, that serves as a critical component of the NEON ecosystem. Part of what we do involves the curating and making available for research these diverse samples and specimens that come in either directly from NEON's field teams or via intermediary contractors that perform additional analyses, including taxonomic identifications, biogeochemical analyses, or genetic and genomic sequencing. To date, the NEON Biorepository has accessioned hundreds of thousands of these samples, with about 100,000 more incoming annually. In order to make all of the research opportunities those samples provide visible, we at ASU must partner closely with NEON headquarters. This is a complex process because while NEON data are highly internally standardized across space and time within a given field protocol, their ecologically focused data structures are not necessarily aligned across taxonomic groups or research objectives. Therefore, significant effort to translate and aggregate across different data products is required to help researchers answer questions about biodiversity broadly or to understand what samples exist for their own use. We have worked with NEON headquarters over the past several years to programmatically translate NEON protocol data into records that follow Darwin Core data standards. These records are then published in a separate but highly synchronized data portal focused specifically on samples. This Symbiota software-enabled portal aggregates NEON occurrence data and has an interface that may be more familiar to those in the biodiversity or natural history collections research communities. All of this work is the foundation upon which we are able to build partnerships with groups outside of the NEON ecosystem, including directly with larger biodiversity data aggregators. For example, we publish all organismal NEON samples to GBIF, thereby increasing their visibility within the global biodiversity research sphere. The unique strengths of NEON structured sampling design also allow us to provide foundational examples for emerging data standards. Here I'm showing how NEON biodiversity informatician Dr. Chandra Earle has led on the mapping of NEON tick sampling and occurrence data into event-based Humboldt Core data standards. To learn more about the application of these emerging standards, I encourage you to attend the session tomorrow, organized in part by our collaborator from GBIF on these efforts, Dr. Kate Ingenloff. Finally, of course, at the center of the entire NEON project are the researchers that use NEON data and samples. We engage with research consortia such as the Imageomics Project, partnering to create a machine learning challenge for building a pipeline using images of neon beetle specimen trays to feed into out-of-distribution models predicting drought conditions. To learn more about this awesome project, I would encourage you to check out Dr. Chandra Earle's talk tomorrow. And it's not just large research consortia that we serve. We have also partnered with many individual research groups to facilitate a variety of projects spanning trait-based ecology, viral discovery, macroecological patterns, and more. If you would like to become one of these partners, I would encourage you to reach out at biorepo@asu.edu. And with that, I would like to acknowledge all of the people that make this work happen. Thank you for listening.
All right, our next presentation will be tracking year-over-year forest dynamics at Santa Rita Ecological Reserve at the on-site using multimodal and multi-platform data by Kit Lewers.
Hi, I'm Kit Lewers from NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, where I'm a Finest Fellow in CU Boulder, and I'm also an ambassador at NEON, or the National Ecological Observatory Network. And if you've never heard of that, you're about to. So my presentation is on tracking forest change with multi-sensor integration at the NEON SJER site by integrating LiDAR, hyperspectral, RGB, or red, green, blue, just traditional imagery, and field data to map tree level change. So forest ecosystems are constantly changing, but capturing that change on an individual tree scale is a huge challenge. So like I said, the work focuses on fusing all of this sensor data together to detect structural and species level change, and most importantly, try to manage the uncertainty that comes from each of these sensors. So the problem with uncertainty is not a unique problem. Each sensing modality will tell us something different, but none are perfect. LiDAR will give us structure. Hyperspectral can tell us about identity, taxa, and health. RGB helps with crown delineation, but even small spatial errors in any of these products can cascade to a 1 to 5 meter GPS drift. And that means that we can be looking at the wrong tree across data or year to year. So the challenge is to combine these data sets in a way that their strengths compensate for one another's weaknesses. And why this is hard is airborne sensors rely heavily on GPS and IMU for positioning, But even under the best of circumstances, accuracy is about a 1 to 3 meter standard deviation, which translates to about 5 to 10 meter drift. And at the tree scale, this is a problem. At the forest scale, landscape scale, not quite as big of an issue. But when we're talking about trees that can have crowns that are a meter wide or less, that becomes an entirely different individual that you're looking at. So to align data across time and sensors, we would have to use time-aware spatial matching. And the end goal is to effectively turn multiple years of data into a coherent 4D view from year to year. And I know I've talked a little bit about NEON and all of these sensors, but what is NEON? So NEON is funded by the National Science Foundation in the United States of America and operated by Battelle. It is designed for continental scale biology, and it collects standardized open ecological data across 81 sites, which is about to become 80 sites. And what I'm talking about mostly is a portion of NEON called the Airborne Observation Platform, or the AOP, which provides synchronized LiDAR, hyperspectral, and high-resolution RGB imagery, which is an incredible resource for studying change, both through space and time, even if you don't want to do it on the individual level. So this is my best friend, Avarice, which is a hyperspectral imaging spectrometer, and it was built by JPL. There's one at JPL, I believe, and this is Avarice Next Generation. There's also multiple versions of Avarice, but this was made by JPL. There's one at JPL, which I did another project with called Bioscape, and then NEON has 3 of these. 2 of them are used for NEON collections, and there's actually a third one for R&D, where if you write a grant and bring money, you can actually fly your own Avarice missions in these awesome twin otter planes. So the reason why I chose the SJER site, or the San Joaquin Experimental Range, is because it is a classic oak savanna landscape, which, if you can kind of see from right here, that means there's space between trees, and there's also very large trees that, like oak trees, that are easy to delineate crowns and wide enough to kind of use as a test area for this project. And the site has really well repeated AOP flights and long-term woody vegetation surveys, which gives us the rare opportunity to test year to year for alignment between airborne and field observations. Excuse me. And for this, I've already kind of said this, but the inputs would be the RGB imagery. Its job would be to delineate crowns with the deep forest algorithm, or an extension to it, which was developed by Ben Weinstein. The hyperspectral data would be for identifying species and assessing vegetation health. The LiDAR point clouds are for vertical structure and mortality, and field plots are for validation and model training. And like I said, the key idea is that each layer constrains the other, narrowing this uncertainty envelope, which allows confidence through integration. So by combining modalities, this reduces false positives and negatives in change detection. And when we fuse the data sets, we gain confidence that they agree with each other. If the LiDAR and hyperspectral can both confirm a tree's position and identity, uncertainty can drop dramatically. And this multi-sensor consensus approach lets us move toward the machine-readable biodiversity records that I kind of mentioned at the beginning. So that would be super awesome. The end goal for this is to be able to run some sort of model or algorithm that can be confident that something is the same tree year over year, identify or classify its species, and then be able to push that into GBIF automatically from these very large scale remote sensing data sets, not only as an observation record, but somehow assign an individual ID so you can track what these look like from year to year, and then eventually scale that up to maybe even satellite observations if possible. But like I said, that's very important that we overcome the challenge of GPS drift, which is why the next part of this project is to quantify uncertainty and do a reduction in uncertainty. So I would like to develop a spatial confidence score per individual tree and scale the approach across neon sites once I can get that more fine-tuned on the SJER site, because that's a good one. But ultimately, I do want to work towards a framework where every tree can be tracked through space and time, which sounds super sci-fi, with a known confidence. And I meant to talk about this, I just realized that I didn't. But I wanted to show spatial drift a little bit. So I'm right now working on isofit retrievals for some neon radiance data. And this is not neon RGB data, it's a little bit more fine scale. But this is neon aberrous hyperspectral imagery, which this is the 1 meter by 1 meter pixels that I was talking about. And we can see even from here to here that there is some drift in what we would expect. Part of this is due to the reduced spatial, oh my gosh, what's that word I'm looking for? Spatial resolution, reduced spatial resolution. But also you can see that there is a pretty clear drift here where the road is kind of going over where it should be, and this line should correlate with this line. And like I said, when we're talking about forests, this is nothing. Like, this is barely a change. It's not a big deal. But when we're talking about individuals, it does become a big deal. So the TLDR is have a pipeline where we can get AOP imagery, remotely sensed imagery, identify tree crowns, classify species, and then use all of these data modalities together to have a confidence score that we're tracking the same individual year over year, and put that into GBIF. If you have any questions, please feel free to discuss this with me. I'm so happy to talk about it. This project is a little bit on hold right now because I really need to graduate, but it's something that's still really on my mind, and I would love to hear thoughts or just chat about it. So thank you.
All right, our next talk is in person. Is Melissa Chapman here? Okay, awesome. So Melissa Chapman will be presenting Beyond Spatial Bias, Understanding the Colonial Legacies and Contemporary Social Forces Shaping Biodiversity Data.
Okay, I'll try to keep to 5 minutes. I'm going to present a paper on behalf of myself and my colleague, Hilary Faxon, who's a professor of environmental social science at University of Montana. So as we've all heard and all know, there's truly a heroic amount of effort going into collecting data about our biosphere and the ways in which it's changing. And as we've also heard throughout the week, despite this effort, there remain massive spatial gaps and disparities in the data we have. Not only where it is, but by whom it's collected, managed, processed. And that's really what we wanted to explore in this broader project that I'm going to present some of the early results of, is trying to really understand who owns, manages, and publishes data, and the implications of that on like what we know about our ecosystems and yeah, how we leverage this data. Okay, so we wanted to also understand not only kind of the patterns that exist, but why these patterns exist and why they persist and shift. And so to do this, we combined a quantitative analysis of data in GBIF with some social and political data. I'm going to present some work that's looking specifically at colonial infrastructure. So we're using a database of colonial dates. And we combine that with interview data. So in this work I'm going to present was 10 interviews with 15 individuals that were conducted as part of some ongoing work into the social construction of biodiversity data. Yeah, so I'm going to explore 3 of the historical and political factors that we found were major drivers and shapers of our current biodiversity data. The first pattern, or the first dimension of this are the legacies of colonial science and post-colonial development. So one of the striking patterns that we saw in the data and through interviews with data publishers was that a lot of colonial patterns persist long after independence. So we can see in, for example, I don't know if there's a pointer here, but, okay, well, for example, so these maps are showing observations, and then they're mapping onto where those data are published for kind of some of the key previous colonizers. And you can see in the bar charts, which are a little blurry, sorry about that, that in a lot of cases, for example, in Spain, a large amount of data is still published about Spain's colonies by Spain. That these patterns of colonialism don't kind of stop at observations that were taken during colonial years. Another thing just to note is that there's a lot of heterogeneity, of course, in sort of these patterns, particularly in post-colonial years, as a result of a lot of heterogeneity in post-colonial development. So in the DRC, a huge amount, or over 30% of data is still published by the former colonizer, whereas in Rwanda, there's been like a lot more movement towards participatory science, and therefore there's a lot of kind of data that's published, sorry, I'm not sure why it's so blurry, that is published by, not owned and published in Rwanda, but by third countries, so a lot in the United States, in like eBird and iNaturalist. Yeah, and I'm gonna point you to the paper, but we also have a lot of interview data that's kind of mapping some of people's perceptions of these patterns onto the patterns we see in the data itself. Yeah, so the second major theme that we talk about in this paper is that infrastructures of international development are also major shapers of our biodiversity data and who owns and manages it. So we can see that a lot of, or that institutions that are located in OECD countries hold the vast majority of biological data content, including that of countries that are not in OECD countries, but all over the world. And a lot of the discussions that we had were around repatriation of data and what that means in the context of these global biodiversity repositories. And then the third theme that we talk about a lot in this work, or that has emerged from this work, is that there's a lot of heterogeneity in contemporary data cultures. And so when we're thinking about these data gaps, both in ownership and management, data gaps, ownership and management of data, there's a lot of discussion, or there were a lot of discussions with people around how we create incentive structures to fill gaps and ensure data sovereignty. So yeah, just quickly in conclusion, these are just a few of the sociological forces that are shaping data availability and ownership, and are by no means kind of all of the forces of these data. And I think one of the main takeaways of the project is that we wanted to illustrate the importance of investigating the historical and political relationships that shape global knowledge about biodiversity. And with that, hopefully I will have time for some questions later on. Thanks.
All right, our last presentation is a recording, connecting sound and life, integrating noise and cetacean databases for marine ecosystem understanding. And our speaker will be Carlos Pinto.
Hello, my name is Carlos Pinto, and I'm going to present the connecting sound and life, integrating noise and cetacean databases for marine ecosystem understanding. I come from ICES. My email is on the slide, and if you have any questions or doubts about this presentation, you are very welcome to email me. Well, like I said, maybe some people don't know ICES, but the full name is International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, It's one of the oldest intergovernmental organizations in the world. It was founded in 1902. It's based, the headquarters are in Denmark, Copenhagen, and it has currently 20 member countries. And the main role is to promote science on the North Atlantic and give advice, for example, for bodies like the EU. Well, the story of this starts that ICES is based with working group, but currently we didn't have any working group on impulsive noise. And we were asked by HALCOM and OSPAR regional sea conventions to accommodate the impulsive noise database. That's like seismic surveys, pile driving, explosions. We must have done a really good job, and we were asked later to store also the continuous noise database. So instead of being the licensed ones is where the institutes put the hydrophone in the sea and they record 24 hours 7 all the time, and then they go and pick every 6 months or every 3 months or a frame of time they go and pick then the recordings. And why is this important? Because it's important to identify what is the main contributors to the noise in the sea, because this affects the animal. And later, in a completely different initiative, we were also asked to store the JCDP, the cetaceans database. And this database aims to store the observations of cetaceans, whales, dolphins, porpoise, yeah. And the objective of this is to understand better the distribution of these animals. On a completely different also initiative, we were asked 2 years later to participate on a project. The initiative was to catalog the sound signatures, meaning building a library in AI that is able to label the digital sounds based on the signature of those sounds to say if it's rain, if it's wind, if it's a whale passing, if it's a click of a dolphin, and this was built as an open library online. So why? I said, why is this important? Because it's important to understand what affects the animals and what kind of sounds we have in the sea. And what is this presentation about is that how all these 4 initiatives, even though separate, they give us a much better understanding of the noise and how they help each other. So we stored the continuous noise database, and one of the things we said to SUMI is to label their sounds, and they said, no, we can't, because each institute has their own library. Each institute labels in the different ways. There could be, labels with different criteria. And then coming this initiative, we are able to say, please all use this library and catalogate, and this then related with the cetaceans database will allow us to validate that position. How to do all that? And that's by asking the ICG noise, that's the EU level, to tell the regional conventions to tell their submitters to use the library. And doing all this aligned, we have a much better management decisions and a better understanding of the ecosystem. Thank you very much for your time. And like I said, if there's any question, please don't hesitate to email me.
All right, thanks again to all our speakers. And so now we'll have a opportunity for folks to ask questions. I'll ask that our in-person speakers join me up here on the stage, and then we'll take in-person questions, and we'll do that first, and then we'll see if there are any questions on Zoom. And if you have questions for folks in the Zoom room, if any of those speakers are here, I think we can like have somebody read responses to you potentially. So we'll see how we can do this hybrid option. So yeah, do we have any questions for folks?
Thank you. The question for Melissa Chapman. You showed it in the presentation that there is a different in paradigm of open access data. Some people have different perspectives on how to give open access data in all these countries. I work a lot of indigenous communities, and we have this kind of situation where we are asking open access data from everybody, but in their context for them to do this, they don't. The concept of open access doesn't exist, literally. So how we always talking about that we have to integrate indigenous communities or communities in the process of data or prioritizing data, but in the same sense, data cannot be open with them. How could we, how can we align these priorities? How can we do something or an action where, I don't know, how can we conciliate these two opposite strategies? Of asking open data, but at the same time, the people that are collecting data and the data that are important doesn't want to leave the data open.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think ultimately, like, yeah, the people whose land data is collected on and who collect the data, it's ultimately their decision whether or not that data can and should be shared in these global repositories. So yeah, it's a point really well taken that like it's not in the keynote there was a great quote about like, as much as possible or yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was. I'm not going to misquote, but yeah, it's a great point. And I think what we were trying to get at in that sort of theme of our work was just trying to understand how different like cultures and ideas and ideals around data sharing can be like thought about when we're like using these data for downstream ecological tasks and or decisions.
Sorry, maybe just to follow up, Melissa, to you on this past question, but I guess one might say, well, there's a sort of a, sorry, I'm losing language as the days go by. The reproduction of these patterns, right? Because the kind of initial data collections rely on these colonial data infrastructures, which means that we now have more data about those areas, which means those global repositories are biased towards these kinds of areas. Also, the researchers are, and the infrastructures are much more developed in those areas, and so I think to the point of indigenous communities, but I think others in the prior session, somebody had mentioned the same thing about Ecuadorian scientists not wanting to contribute to GBIF. There's a kind of question of whether these global repositories themselves are seen by some as continuing this practice of extraction, because there's no kind of way value back on one sense, but on the other sense that they're biased to begin with, so that there's right. So how do we break out of this? I suppose.
Yeah, I mean that's a question that I think the whole community needs to work on a solution to. But yeah, I think ultimately these like a more decentralized approach to global data is probably going to be, if not the solution, part of the solution. And I think to your point about like that a lot of this data is kind of from colonial collections, and otherwise like repatriation of that data would actually like change a lot of those patterns that I showed. So like the observations were taken in former colonies, but the data is owned and managed by the colonizers. So if the data were owned and managed elsewhere, you would see slightly different patterns. And it doesn't, of course, solve like the spatial bias problem, which we kind of ignored in this whole piece. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Quick reminder, just, I guess we didn't really say this at the beginning, but if you want to ask a question and when we're responding, please state your name and where you're from, just so people online have an idea of who's talking, because not everybody's present. So to start that trend off, my name is Kate Ingenloff. I am on the science team at GBIF. And so this is something that has come up a lot in conversation lately, and there is no single answer as we discussed. But the reality is a lot of data that come into GBIF and a lot of data that are shared and by scientists throughout the world do have, I don't want to say they have a history of, but they have a reputation tied to them because they are tied to Western science. There are many, many indigenous communities, and I have many friends in the States and colleagues that I've worked with that look at Western science as regardless of who's doing it, they see it as consumption. People are trying to take advantage of it, and there's no giving back, there's no thought for the ethics or the value and the cultural implications of that data. And it is really difficult to reconcile that strict Western science perspective of we have to have this data because we all need it to share these global questions, and it's free for all because our tax dollars paid for it. But then you have the perspectives of people who have lived and known these lands for how many generations, and the way they view the data, the way they view the information about nature and ecology and the world around them is not tied to numbers. It's not tied to photos and sensor-related imagery and things like that. It's tied to everything about who they are. And that perspective is something that Western science is trying to learn to respect, but hasn't proven that they do. And so at GBIF, the discussion has come up, and so we actually now have a task group for Indigenous data governance. It's in its infancy. We're learning a lot, but these are things that are going to take time, and as a community, as Western scientists, we have to actually prove that we deserve to have these interactions, and we deserve to be that we respect the people and the data enough for them to share it.
Have I got time for just a comment?
You have good perspective from Australia.
Andre Zerger from the Atlas of Living Australia, and we're at the same point in our journey, I guess. And the language that's starting to be used certainly, and this is more about the future. I think a lot of the conversations have been around how data and how data sovereignty has occurred in the past, but the language that's used, certainly where I am at the moment, is co-design, starting with a co-design process. And I heard an anecdote recently, one of our board members, who is Indigenous actually, but he applied for a grant to develop a data infrastructure, and he put forward a co-design process, and in the grant he said, we don't know what we're going to do. And he was successful, but what he put forward was, we're going to launch a co-design process. He described the co-design process, but not the outcomes of the project at all. And that takes a brave funding agency to fund that type of work, because I guess in our current construct, there's a beginning, a middle and an end. There's a product in 2 years. I think the other thing we're certainly learning, we've got an Indigenous Ecological Knowledge program that's very small, but it's been reasonably successful. It takes a lot of time, and we've been supporting that for about 14 years. So the typical funding cycles don't apply, and what's been really helpful for us in this one very small program is to have someone working on country, physically present. So even simple things like that have helped us a lot, but still very early days. But I think the co-design language is pretty powerful for the future.
All right, I guess I have a comment related to that. Since, yeah, I have some experience like attempting to do stuff like that also. So at NEON, we've collaborated with some folks with various synthesis groups, and we set down the road with the intention of co-design with indigenous collaborators. And yeah, it's challenging to put together a proposal when like just the order of operations is difficult. Like, do you bring in people you're co-designing with before you have the money? And they might not, you know, like, or do you get some funds first to then bring in folks to be able to pay them for their time so that they can collaborate? Because not everyone's at an academic institution where they already have their time covered to develop ideas. And so that was an interesting challenge. We don't have a good solution to it, but it was just an experience that we went through that. Yeah, it's challenging for sure, the co-production process. Any other thoughts on this topic? Do we have any, oh, yeah?
Sorry, just to give a perspective. I'm from the Amazon. I'm from a traditional community there called São João do Tupé. And for example, we see that there's a great misalignment of what there's a global demand for data and what are priorities of the community related to that data. So we want, for example, jaguar, just an example on conservation. People tend to see the jaguar as a great indicator of conservation there, but it has a lot of social conflicts to the community. A jaguar entering our community, we kill it. Because if you don't like it, put your kid next to the jaguar and you'll see the perspective. And so we see that the conservation that we are trying to make, like a global, is not aligned to the other communities that are going there. So use the jaguar as an indicator, but without knowing that we are killing the same indicator that you think that is good. You know, it's counterproductive. So there's a socio-economic dimension to data for us there. Data is not dead. It doesn't represent just a number on a table. It actually represents what are our priorities. So there's social dimensions. What is the fruit that they consider the most important? Doesn't even have conservation status. The things that we consider the most important to live in the territory has nothing at all in conservation priorities, what IUCN is doing or any other organization is doing. So for us to integrate the perspectives of the people that are really nature stewards, we have to explore the social dynamics of the data, the socio-economic dynamics of data. It's not just conservation. Conservation is a socio-economic problem. It's not environmental. There's people down there. We're not conserving trees. When you see people going from drone and there's a green mattress in the Amazon, but there's some people living below it. And that people actually holds the key on the protection of that place. Maybe the conservation is actually for the people, not of the animal. It's not conservation of one animal, of a whole ecosystem, of a whole science of relationships that we have there. So just to give a perspective that until we see data as just as a dead thing, as a thing that is not related to the lives of the people who are using the data, we are missing the point on conservation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Do we have any other questions or?
Sorry, adding on to that real quick. So I actually learned a lot about this. I used to live in Hawaii and was doing a lot of work in Hawaii, and this is a very common topic of discussion. And the way our museum worked is that we had a natural science department and a cultural department, but we also had a cultural committee that anybody in the museum could go to sort of ask these questions, or if I need a Hawaiian name to put on my proposal, what do I do? If I need a Hawaiian name that I want to put on this new species that I have since described, what should that Hawaiian name be? And I think the one major thing that I learned from just that process is, of course, being respectful of these people's time and abilities, but just how busy they are and how many people are constantly coming up to them asking, for their opinion and expertise and time. And so a lot of that was a lot of patience building that I had to learn in that process. And so, I don't know, just something to think about.
Do we have any online questions? All right, I have a question for Lindsay. Kind of switching gears a little bit. I'm curious about thoughts you have on ways to facilitate kind of collaboration between the collections world and kind of the monitoring world. So we've been talking about this. In fact, Ed is in the back, where we had a discussion about this at lunch. But folks that do research on samples and collections and the sorts of questions they ask, and we haven't been doing a great job bridging that with the community that uses kind of the more observational data and monitoring networks like NEON. And we're struggling with thinking about how do we get those two worlds, the collections world and the more traditional, well, not traditional, but ecologists that aren't working with the collections. How do we get them, how do we bridge that gap and facilitate synthesis that way?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think about this a lot. So I'm sort of at the ground level working with obviously a lot of students, a lot of researchers that are going out into the field, collecting their materials, bringing them back with the hopes that they'll get deposited into the collection, or that's the end goal, right? And that's always a very complicated process. And then, of course, working with these large-scale programs that have all these different types of observational data points that are being collected, and talking with them early and often to let them know that they need to think about how it can all come together. And I think that's something that is a huge work in progress. And what we're finding now is, right, we have this massive amount of data, and now what I'm here to learn about is how can we standardize it so that I can go back and have those conversations with them, let them know what the path is forward, what the benefits of us all kind of working together, speaking one standardized language can be, so that we have the ability to bring together, for example, with respect to the Cal Coffee data, we can bring physical, chemical, biological data, even the mammal and bird observational data all together. And that's something that's, you know, happening right now. It's tough, but I think we have to keep having regular conversations about it, get people into the museums, show people from digitization to data production what that process looks like. I find that, yeah, when I'm training students and I show them that first product to the end product, all of a sudden things click. If you're not in a museum space, it's really hard to see what that looks like. So that's, yeah, some of my thoughts.
Curious if anyone else in the room has thoughts on bridging kind of inquiry and synthesis between folks working in collections and folks working with field data. All right, well, we can switch gears again. Kind of going back to the motivation for this session, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, either one of you or both of you. Thinking about, you know, the new technologies that folks are using, you know, AI comes to mind, obviously, like there was a whole session on AI tools earlier today, and thinking about the opportunities we have with these synthesis projects and cross-institution collaborations and cross-network collaborations to sort of think about and understand how we build guardrails and how people are using AI in our discipline. So I wonder if you have any, like, either top concerns or top ideas or priorities that you think about in that space.
As it relates to my field, so I'm in, you know, traditional taxonomy. So at first we looked at it as a foe, and now I think as I'm training, you know, different machine learning algorithms for gliders that are taking zooplankton images, I'm realizing I'm passing on my knowledge to this product to, you know, take away part of that. But what I've realized is there are specific questions that I can answer, and there are specific questions that technology can answer. And we need to be providing answers to contemporary questions faster. And if that can do that, there are certain questions that we can use those technologies for. But I don't think it's a complete replacement for species-specific level information. And long-term data sets like the Cal Coffee program I've talked about have revealed that there are these different trends on different timescales that we can look at on secular trends, annual trends, multi-decadal trends. So I think it needs to be more of, yeah, how can we work together? But as far as building guardrails, that's a little outside my purview.
cool. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to name any guardrails off the cuff, but a couple of things that I've been like thinking about a lot in this space are like, one, just when we're thinking about the like disparities in the data we have, not only like the spatial disparities, but also the taxonomic disparities, the like disparities in who owns data, all of the rest. Like algorithms are like ultimately trained on data, and this is the data that we have about our biosphere, and it reflects you know, a certain subset of the world's like conservation priorities, like all of these sort of like contexts that come along with these data can easily, are already being lost in the context of large scale synthesis. And so if we're only like enabling larger and larger scale synthesis, how do we like do that and like get the benefits from some of the insights that these tools like allow us to receive, while also like acknowledging that these data are coming with context and with like histories of inequity and all of these sorts of things, and how do we ensure that these tools aren't just entrenching all of those histories and all of those biases. And I don't have answers for that, but it's like I think something that we can like continue to think about as a community and like put like at the forefront of like every application of AI, like what are the implications of this for downstream decisions, for whatever, like, yeah, how do we ensure that there's like a notion of fairness or equity in the application?
Yeah, that's really interesting thinking about these tools enable us to scale up, but we lose so much when we do that. So yeah, that's a really good point.
But I mean, also, like, to be fair, like, these tools also potentially, or in some cases, they allow us to synthesize and harmonize, like, a larger diversity of, like, modalities of data, right? We're not, like, as constrained to data that can, like, be reduced into a CSV or, like, an Excel sheet or whatever, a spreadsheet. Like, we can now, like, work more readily with text data and otherwise. And so, like, maybe there is also space where AI and like other computational tools can like help us better engage with the context of data in large scale synthesis. Yeah, so hopefully it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah. Are there any thoughts out in the audience or questions? And I'll check online one more time. I think we're coming up on, we have 7 minutes.
Hi, my name is Ricardo from the Biodiversity Information System in Colombia, and I think that synthesizing the data is very important, and maybe could be an approach to engage more from, for example, people from communities, because they could see the value of the data. For example, we had an experience 1 year, 2 years ago with a community in the Cauca, in the south region of Colombia, and they said like, okay, we want to make an ecotourism project, and they were building everything in their reserve, but they say like, they were monitoring everything, and they say we could publish the data through the SIP Colombia, and then take this data and have checklists and numbers, so when the people come here, they exactly know what we have here. So they see the potential of the data, and we see the potential of synthesizing this data. And we have now a data portal that allows us to access, and we update them for him every year. So they have a checklist, and I think it's very important from us, like these partnerships across data providers, because we could be able to synthesize this data, because we have another publisher like the ministry that publish the official checklist of invasive species. So we can cross the data that they publish with this official data, and then we have, okay, you have 3 endemic species in your region, so you have to protect these species, because it's the main point that people want to come here just to look for these species maybe. So I think it's very important for biodiversity information systems to think more about the use of the data. So the use of the data could be a way to engage more publishers.
So I really appreciate that comment, and I think that really kind of comes back to the heart of kind of maybe the broader perspective of what we were getting at and kind of thinking about and setting up this this seminar here is, and I really, as I've been listening to people, different people's perspectives and the different presentations that have been amazing to hear today and comments from the audience, it really feels like more than anything that we need to have personal self-awareness. So whether it's within our organization, it's in our research group, it's at our museum, whatever level it is, know and understand who we are, what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and what we don't know and what we don't excel at. And where you're missing those things, where you have gaps, that's where you're reaching out and forming partnerships and reaching out to, you know, to learn more about the local communities and the, not just what you're trying to study biologically, but learning about the culture and the history and the perspectives around that and the values. And on the more technical side, well, we don't know about standards, reaching out to, you know, your specific community of interest, seeing where those standards are, if they exist, if they don't, starting to figure out how to help make that happen. That's where I really think a lot of this is coming into, and it really comes back to a lot of self-reflection, and then being very honest with yourself within that self-reflection as an organization or as a community or as a group, and moving from there and trying to make those partnerships so that you can, and I say you, this is the universal you, including myself, so that we can grow together and we can build those bridges together and make those connections more apparent and make it easier to reach out to our students and our colleagues and make these a more repeatable processes and open processes, and yeah, being very clear about it.
Yeah, and I would say not just knowing what your gaps are, but also publishing what those gaps are, right? Don't abstract those away. Make that loud and proud. I don't know about this. Please come help me. You know, I'm open to partnerships, whatever, da 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 da. But
All right. Does anyone, if anyone else has questions or comments? Oh, wait.
Okay.
We got 2 minutes? Yeah.
I just have one more comment. To kind of come back to this idea of self-reflection. I really enjoyed the plenaries this morning to bring us kind of back to thinking again about why we're collecting data, not just how much we can collect, and getting away from that sort of capitalistic approach, because of course, you know, I was just involved in my first large-scale digitization effort. It's like I gotta hit those number of lots, but then I'm thinking, you know, as you're running through your data, what are the data types that are most important to put out there? What information really needs to live on to make that record useful, and for what purpose? So that's something that I'm going to really continue to think about, because of course we are all time limited, we are all space limited, and I want to make it easier for these materials to live on, for the valuable information to move forward and to be more used. So yeah, thanks for leading today.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, let's thank our speakers. And thank you all very much for coming.